Hello, brilliant entrepreneur, and welcome to day 8 of Tashmas. This is episode number 469 of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast, which means you can find all the relevant links and the show notes for today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/469. And of course, because it's a Tashmas episode, I have a great freebie for you over at that link. And in today's episode, we're going to help you to make the algorithms more aligned with what you want them to do and really learn how to tip the algorithms in your favor. And we're going to do that by answering quite a loaded question, which is, are you an algorithm bestie or minion? Ooh. So let's dive in, and don't forget to come to the show notes to grab your gift for Tashmas today as well. Let's do it. Hello, I'm Tash Corbin, a business strategist and mentor based on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. The mission of this podcast is to help heart-centered entrepreneurs to make more money, and in doing so, change the world for the better. This podcast was recorded on the lands of the Gubbi Gubbi and Jinnaburra people. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Now, it seems there is just a growing list of all the rules, tips, and strategies that you need to follow in order to even have any hope of your content reaching a handful of people on social media these days. We need to ensure that we keep the algorithms on our side. Don't put links in your posts because algorithms don't like that. Don't use the word free. Algorithms don't like that. And it can make it feel like the algorithm is just this really cranky person who you have to bend yourself into different shapes, and you tie yourself in knots trying to please and appease. And what ends up happening for a lot of people, especially business owners, is you end up becoming a real algorithm minion. You do everything you think that the algorithm wants. You follow every rule. You try every strategy. And just like that Regina George, Mean Girls reference, type character, it doesn't matter how much you do exactly what they say, they'll always be mean to you, right? Like, it's looking at the algorithm as though it's almost like your overlord. And that's where the term algorithm minion has come from, is that I see people teaching others how to be a minion to the algorithm and always like bowing down to the amazing expertise of the algorithm. And part of the reason why so many people do this and then start to proliferate those rules and share those rules and try and teach others those rules is because they don't take a step back and think about what is the alternative. Is there actually another way to engage with algorithms that works for them but also works for you? And that is making the algorithm your bestie instead of being a minion to that algorithm overlord. So if you think about the difference, a minion has dozens and dozens of rules to follow. You have to try and trick the algorithm and like do things without it noticing. You have to bend yourself into different types of content and different ways of posting in order to kind of appease where the wind is blowing in the algorithm at this kind of time. And you have to obey the algorithm from fear. When you are a minion to the algorithm, you are afraid that it's going to punish and penalize you. And so you are trained into being a very obedient minion to the algorithm. Whereas if you just engage with the algorithm as though it is your best friend, number one, it makes a huge difference to your mindset when you're showing up on social media and the way you feel about being on social media as well. But think about what it's like to have one of those symbiotic, amazing bestie relationships with someone. You feel like you can be in charge of your own domain. You can be yourself. You can show up fully because your bestie's going to love you for it. And you can absolutely have that kind of relationship with social media algorithms. You almost train the algorithm to love you and accept you for exactly who you are and exactly the kind of way that you behave. You then don't need the drama of staying on top of all of the new rules. You don't need the drama of testing and seeing what the algorithm is favoring right now. Instead, by knowing what makes the algorithm tick at its very core, you get to have this symbiotic relationship. The algorithm gets to know you and love the content that you're putting out, and you get rewarded by the algorithm. You're nourishing each other. It's a symbiotic relationship. Now, I know that up until this point, I've been talking in metaphor, right? This psychological or symbolic difference between the way that you engage with the algorithm on social media. But I think it's important that we do that first before we go into the detailed strategy, because there are still so many content creators and social media experts out there that will constantly try and drill it home that you need to obey the algorithms and you need to listen to their 45,000 different rules and pieces of advice and follow them diligently and perfectly. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time. And I want you to be very strong and resilient to that kind of fear-based messaging. So I wanted to bring this concept forward of algorithm bestie versus algorithm minion, so that in future, when you see that kind of fear-based content that says, don't ever share links in your posts on Facebook because it'll never get in front of as many people as if you have the link in the comments, you can instead remind yourself, before you get all freaked out by it, you can instead remind yourself, that's if I wanted to be an algorithm minion. But the algorithm is my bestie. And so I don't need to worry myself with all of these different rules and all of these different restrictions and ways that I need to tie myself in knots that just end up stopping you from sharing any content on social media at all. Because you start to feel like, well, there's no point in doing it if I don't do it perfectly aligned with what the algorithm wants. And so what you end up doing is robbing your audience of actually getting to learn from you and hear from you at all, because you're freaking out that you're not doing it the right way, that you haven't got all of the algorithm rules lined up properly. So I wanted to start with the metaphor to create that sense of real solidarity, that your job as a content creator on social media is not to be a minion to the algorithm, and instead to develop this symbiotic best friends forever kind of relationship. So how do we do that? Well, we need to remember what the thing is that never changes about the algorithm, and that is the algorithm's job. Since the day that algorithms were first trialed on social media until this very day, the job of the algorithm has never, ever once changed. The job of the algorithm is to put content in front of people who want that content. And the algorithm learns about who wants that content and what people are going to engage with by looking at those patterns and trends. So all those people who are algorithm minions have noticed what those patterns and trends are and tried to trick the algorithm into believing that their audience wants to see their content. Can you see how this is actually just creating like a huge workload and like mindset drama for yourself? But that is what most social media teachers are teaching, is actually how to trick the algorithm so that your content gets shared to more and more people. But because the algorithm's core job at its very core is to put content in front of people who are going to love that content, then the algorithm very quickly becomes adept at spotting those tricks. That's why the list of rules of how to appease the algorithm gods is getting longer and longer. So if instead we want to build a bestie relationship, we need to remember that the algorithm is just trying to do its job. And its job is to put content in front of people who will love it. And the key measure of whether people love that content or not also has not changed. The key measure is engagement. To what extent do the people the algorithm puts your content in front of engage with that content? So if you have, say, 300 followers on Instagram and you put a post up on Instagram and the reach of that post is only 25 people and it doesn't get any engagement, it doesn't get any hearts, it doesn't get any comments, no one saves that post, that's not the algorithm's fault. That's not the algorithm's fault. Because what that says is the algorithm put that content in front of 25 of the 300 people who follow your Instagram profile, and not one of those 25 people found that content particularly engaging. They didn't like it. They didn't comment on it. They didn't save it. They probably didn't even stop scrolling to read the caption. If they didn't engage with it, they didn't even click read more. They didn't read the full caption of that post. So that's not the algorithm's fault that your content was so unappealing, was so uninteresting, was so unvalued by the 25 people most likely to value and engage with it, that the algorithm went, you know what? I'm not going to show it to anyone else. At its core, that is the algorithm doing its job. And it's a little bit of like a little tough love moment, but I really want to break this down into as much of a micro strategy as possible because there is so much rhetoric out there. There's so much advice out there about bypassing this algorithm, about tricking this algorithm to show your content to more people. But if your hottest audience don't like that content anyway, what difference does it make whether the post gets in front of 25 people or 100 people if every single one of those people is disinterested in that content? I would argue you're actually training the algorithm that it doesn't matter how many people you show your content to, none of them want it. So don't you want to start showing the algorithm and training the algorithm that the people it shows your content to are grateful to see that content? Because if that is what your goal is, tricking the algorithm is not the answer. And resorting to that trickery and those kinds of tactics is exactly what keeps most business owners tied up, running around in circles, over finessing their content, putting far too much time, energy, and effort into their social media content, only to have that social media contribute less than 1% of their overall results in their business. And that is what I see over and over and over again, especially for people in the early stages of growing their business. It's time for us to stop that and instead focus on making the algorithm your bestie and remembering the role that social media content plays in your overall marketing strategy. And for most people, running around and chasing strangers on the internet is not an effective use of your time anyway. So when you are creating content for social media, and I am not by any stretch saying you shouldn't put content on social media, but when you are creating content for social media, your number one job is to create content that your existing audience will engage with. And we don't want to trick them either. We create content your existing audience will engage with because you know what is valuable to them. We create content that your existing audience will love and engage with because it's compelling, because it meets the exact reason why they click the follow button in the first place. The way we interpret our social media insights is crucial here because there are far too many people complaining that they have 500 followers on Facebook and the last post that they shared only got put in front of 30 of them, and the algorithm is just holding us back. The algorithm's doing a terrible job. And I would argue, actually, no, your content is doing a terrible job. Because what that says to me is, as I said, that algorithm put that content in front of the 30 people it thought would be most interested in your content, and all 30 of them said, nah, not interested. So your job is not to get angry at the algorithm. It's not to try and trick the algorithm. It's not to try and trick your audience into engaging with your content, to try and tell the algorithm that your audience loves your content even though they don't. Your job is to focus on creating content that your hottest audience, your most engaged audience, are going to love and adore and can't help but engage with. The more they engage with it, the more you are teaching the algorithm that your audience loves your content, and therefore the more consistently the algorithm will show your content to larger and larger portions of your audience. So long as, when it does, that audience values and therefore engages with that content. So think about for yourself, what is the kind of content that you most engage with and you most value on social media? Is it the content that's constantly yelling at you and telling you you're doing things wrong? Is it the content that's constantly speaking in verbose language and industry-specific terms and is really confusing and hard to digest? Is it the content that looks like ads and constantly feels like I'm being sold to? Is it the content that asks long-winded, hard-to-answer questions that seem to be setting me up for a sucker punch? Or is it the content that actually helps me understand a concept, deepen my understanding of a certain area or facet of my life, move closer to a goal, solve a problem, gives me quick advice that I can put in place really quickly, teaches me something that I didn't know before, asks me questions that are really easy to answer, and give me insights by answering them? Think about the kinds of content that you love seeing on social media. Think about the kinds of content that you engage with on social media. Social media is social. Stop making every post look like an ad. Stop making every post branded. Stop making every post only the picture-perfect photos that you got taken on that photo shoot 14 years ago that don't even look like what you look like today. And instead, think about what your audience values. They value realness. They value connection. They're on social media for entertainment, inspiration, education, advice. What is it that they're there for? Connection with their friends. Social media is social. Social media has ads on it, yes, but your audience are not on there thinking, oh, I wonder which ads I'll see in my feed today. So if you start to feel yourself either becoming an algorithm minion or getting cranky at the algorithm for not showing your content to enough people, I want you to remember your job is to make the algorithm your bestie by remembering the algorithm's job is to put content in front of people who love that content. And the number one measure that the algorithm has as to whether they love it or not is engagement. So your job is to create content that your existing audience will love and adore engaging with and can't help themselves but engage with. That is going to consistently train the algorithm that your content is loved and adored by your audience. And that is where your content starts to get shown to even wider audiences, because the algorithm starts to learn, oh, okay, well, this is what all of this person's audience have in common. I wonder if other people who have that same quality or have that same interest will like this content too. And it starts to show it to wider and wider audiences. But until you get amazing at creating content your existing audience wants to engage with, you're really going to struggle to turn the algorithm into that bestie. Now, because it's Tashmas, yes, there is an amazing gift for you today, and that gift happens to be a freebie. And that is, you get to jump in and grab my $0 Facebook marketing or $0 Instagram marketing training absolutely free. I'll have all the instructions with the show notes of today's episode at tashcorbin.com/469. And you'll be able to choose, do you want to learn how to grow and engage with your audience on Facebook for free, or grow and engage your audience on Instagram for free, depending on which is your primary social media platform? And we will send you the relevant free training. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Heart Centered Business Podcast. Get out there, let's stop being minions and make the algorithm our bestie. And until next time, I cannot wait to see you shine. I'll see you tomorrow for day 9 of Tashmas.